Hello and welcome to Computer Science 30S. This is lesson number 4, types of variables. And this particular lesson is a little bit different. There won't be any practice assignments or handed assignments at the end. This is strictly for information and thus will be a relatively short lesson as well. So after this lesson, you will know the difference between variables that are for all sprites and ones that are for individual sprites. You'll also understand that it's considered bad practice to make all variables global and that there can be conflicts between block variables and main code variables, and that generic naming in blocks makes more useful in other scripts. It's something that we've touched on already. You'll notice that there's nothing that you're going to be able to do at the end of this because this isn't that type of lesson. Okay, so we've seen a lot of different types of variables, normal, global variables. These variables are made in the regular menu and can be used anywhere. Anything that's in a variable in the main code can be used anywhere. The variable score below is an example. These can be used by any sprite, any block, or in any script. Okay, so for example, score right here. So we would call this a global variable. When you create a normal global variable, you can select if the variable is for this sprite only. Then these variables will show up as variables listed below the line in the variables tab. We recommend not using these variables in blocks. Okay, so for example here, Gobo score, this little line right there, that is the score only for Gobo, that particular sprite. There may be instances where you want the variable to only refer to that value for that particular sprite. It's also considered bad practice to make all variables global. You try to set the variable to no larger scope than is needed. That's just so that you don't get conflicts happening. Just a very good habit to get into. Arguments to a function or the parameters that we pass. A variable set by the person calling a function. We also refer to this as an input. This can only be used within the block editor. So for example here, when I create this little block called draw square and size only exists, the variable size only exists inside the block. Any number or variable can be sent to the block, but that value will be used as size in the block. So it doesn't matter what you call it in the main script, that value that is passed, if I called it large or big or X or length or what have you, in the main code, that value of length, if length is say 200, then 200 is set equal to size, and I use that value here. Okay, and it just makes your blocks more generic. They can be used in many different places. Again, a concept we've touched on a few times already. Script variables. The script variable block gives us a variable that we can use inside the script. They're not passed. It's just used inside the particular block for some type of very small little thing that I need to do just inside that particular block. The script could be a block script shown below or a regular script. Much like arguments, these exist only inside the block. However, they are not inputs to the block, so they're different. They're only used inside the script, and they're not reported back or anything like that. They could, however, though, be used to return a value to the calling script. As an example here, you don't see it, but at the bottom you might remember that we returned bigger values. So that's one way to get those values back to your main code. Conflicts between regular variables and block variables. We'd like to point out something about accessing regular variables when we're in the block editor. In the current situation, we have the regular variables x, y, and z in the main script. There they are there, x, y, and z. We've made a block that takes arguments named x and y. Bad idea. When we use a set block, we click on the drop-down menu to see what variables are available to us. So, example right here. Notice the first variable shown is z. This is the regular variable z. This is the one from the main line. Then below the line are variables x and y. We've made the input names the same as the regular variables. Bad idea. So we can no longer access those regular variables. If I accidentally sent the values y and then x, I would be in some deep trouble here, kind of thing. So be very aware of your naming here. It's very bad to sort of set everything to global. But look for this type of thing here. This particular z is from the mainline code, and the x and y are simply inside the block themselves. You probably don't understand the need for all this, but at some point in the future, it'll all make a little bit more sense to you. If we add another block variable z in our block editor like this, we're no longer able to access regular variable z. So these are x, y, and z. Those are local variables inside this particular block. Here are two ways to think about why it works this way. The block variables is that they block access to regular variables with the same name. And when we use a variable named x inside the block header, scratch or snap or whatever we call it, has to figure out which variable we're referring to. It starts by looking at the block variables. If there is one there, it assumes you mean that variable. If there's no variable in the block, that has that name and assumes that you mean the regular variable. So again, just be aware of this when naming variables. Try to use more generic names and blocks so that they can be used in any program. Considered good programming practice. Okay, that's the end of lesson 4. As I said, there's no practice here. It was just sort of for information purposes only. You can probably move on to the next lesson.